But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Now for those new to this channel, you might be wondering, why Vincent van Gogh? Why on earth are you covering Vincent van Gogh? What does that have to do with true crime? There's a lot to do with true crime. There's a murder weapon, there's a ear incident where the police were involved, where Vincent van Gogh nearly bled to death. There's speculation about mental illness and so on. And even now, even 130 years later, there are still criminal aspects associated with Van Gogh. He's one of the most valuable artists in the world. His art has been recently stolen during this pandemic from a museum in the Netherlands. So there is very much a true crime narrative involved. Why now? Well, it is the 130th anniversary of Van Gogh's death this year on July the 29th. So roughly 3 months from now, May, June, July, Vincent van Gogh lost his life in Auvers-sur-Oise, which is in the north of France. It's slightly north of Paris. I went there I retraced Van Gogh's footsteps both in Arles and Saint-Remy around about this time last year. I went to Arles and I went to Paris, and I went to his grave and the place where he lived and slept and painted. I walked the fields of Auvers-sur-Oise. And I investigated it as a true crime investigation. And recently there's been quite a lot of speculation that Van Gogh didn't shoot himself, that he was actually shot. And where I depart from that research, and this is research by Pulitzer Prize winning authors, very well respected. You can read their theory in their book, their best-selling book, Van Gogh, The Life. Where I depart from them is they say it was an accidental shooting. I put forward a original theory that it was a murder with a motive, with somebody involved, and there's quite a lot of evidence to back that up. The murder weapon disappearing, Vincent's artwork that he was using at the time disappearing, and the dynamics surrounding all that also all add up to a murder, as well as the aftermath to his death. So that's what I'm trying to build up to. I realize it's not everyone's cup of tea, this kind of thing. I mean, if there's ever a cold case in true crime, this is it. I mean, it's probably not even recognized as a crime by many people. Of course, when Vincent van Gogh was shot, the police did come to investigate, what happened. So that stuff we're going to go through, but the important thing is we're going to deal with it in real time. So we're going to deal with the events as they happened 130 years ago. Okay, that's what this is all about. So before we deal with what happened today, 130 years ago, I just want to update you guys on just some news of a kind of a current nature, just in terms of this channel and Patreon. So the first thing I just want to point out is there will be another episode on Gannon Stalk on this channel, probably later today or tomorrow, dealing with will Harley testify against her mother or for her mother? Will she defend her mother, or will she be a sort of a witness for the prosecution? And how I'm going to answer that is, first of all, by looking at what we already know in terms of the case, in terms of the mother-daughter relationship, and then also looking at a couple of other court cases where family members have testified either for them or against them. So we're going to look at that. My book on The Murder of Gannon Stork. It's called Boy Interrupted. Reached number 3 on Amazon at the moment. I think there are 5 reviews, mostly positive. 4 of them are 5-star reviews, as far as I know. One of them's a negative review. I'm not sure if the person's read the book who left the 1-star review, but the criticism seems to be that this is all public knowledge. Everybody knows it. And that's kind of true. You might think, if you've been following the case, that everything in the public domain you know about. I don't know whether you would have seen the narrative organized in a chronological way, number one. I don't know whether you've seen the narrative interpreted in a cohesive way where you attach and link the interpretations to one another in a chronological, organized, systematic way. I don't know whether you would have seen interpretations of some of this stuff. And then also things that look like errors. For example, was the car rented from Avis Rent a Car? I don't think that's correct. And then there's certain insights and things that are added that are not in this narrative, that are obviously speculative, but nevertheless taking what we know and then taking what we don't know and putting it together into something that kind of makes sense. The other side of it, of course, is looking at intertextualities, and that is a sort of unique to true crime rocket science. That's where we look at other crimes and we see how the stats, the personalities, the psychologies, the forensics, where you see a match and what that tells you or kind of predicts, in the same way that you have legal precedent that informs court cases and trials. You also have that kind of thing in true crime that predicts or shows something that may be the case. Not necessarily, but often criminal psychology goes in patterns. Crimes happen in ways that you can kind of profile. So we're gonna look at that. There is some of that kind of analysis on Patreon, looking at things like, can we predict what the murder weapon is going to be? What do the stats say about that, and all that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that, you can head to Patreon. The audiobook's also available on Patreon at quite a low price, $5. And then the book on Kindle is available on Kindle and on Kindle Unlimited and also in paperback. Then what's also going to reappear on this channel, I have done quite a few episodes already on the Madeleine McCann case. You can go to the playlist section on my channel and just look where the various cases are kind of separated into playlists. If you want to catch up on the Madeleine McCann coverage, I'm going to get back into that probably from next week, Monday onwards. So from around about the 27th onwards, I'm going to be dealing with the Madeleine McCann case, what the Netflix documentary covered. And I've written a couple of books on the Madeleine McCann case, best-selling books that have done really well. Doubt, Deep into Darkness. And when I went to Europe last year, before I retraced Van Gogh's steps, I actually started my trip in Portugal. I went to Praia de Luz and I did some investigating on the ground there. So what I want to do on this channel between basically now, the end of April and May, is I want to show you some of my investigation, both into the Van Gogh story and Madeleine McCann. It might seem quite crazy, but I'm going to show you some photos from Praia de Luz and share some of my insights on the ground. I wrote a book before I went there, and I'm writing a book called Deeper into Darkness, which is about some of the insights that I picked up while I was there. Some of them quite interesting. For example, the shutters, how the shutters work, and what that, just in terms of the shutters, what that can tell us about the McCann case that I don't think people would necessarily know or appreciate. And then, so there's going to be some analysis and photos of that coming along. I also want to introduce you to some of the places Van Gogh visited and lived in, such as Arles and Auvers, but I want to deal with that more in sort of May and June. Van Gogh left Arles and the Saint-Remy area in late May, so about this time next month. And then he spent the last 2 years of his life in Auvers, and I want to take you to those places. I want to show you where he was, what he saw, what he experienced. Okay, so if you're interested in keeping up to date with that, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. On Patreon, there's an ongoing series on the Kissinger tapes. This is stuff that's not available in the regular Discovery. It's a transcript of the audio that she gave, and it is stuff that where the audio cut off on the August 16th interview, and then the other transcripts as well. And that is a series called the Kissinger tapes. You can listen to that for just $1 a month. And then there's also the ongoing Christopher Watts What Else Do We Know series. Actually, I haven't posted on that for a while. Probably do another episode on Monday. But that's also an ongoing series, also $1. And then the audio books are $5 for the short ones, $10 for the long one. Okay, and so let's deal with 130 years ago today in terms of Vincent van Gogh. So something I want to highlight is the similarity in circumstances between the singular figure of Vincent van Gogh struggling to deal with his circumstances 130 years ago. So this was a guy who was sick, he was struggling with mental illness, who was struggling with isolation, who was struggling. He was struggling to make a living. You can basically take the entire spectrum of the pandemic scenario that the world finds itself in now. You can kind of personify that in one person, and that's Vincent van Gogh. You can kind of put all those little things, all those troubles and dilemmas into his situation. And his situation was, he didn't know it, in the same way that we don't know how this coronavirus works or where it's going to take us. He was in the same situation. This was 130 years ago. In that time, they would call a lot of ailments that they didn't recognize epilepsy. That was the name for it. Hospitals were called asylums. And they could often not tell the difference between someone who was physically ill and someone who was mentally ill. And Van Gogh was a good example of that. Now, what Van Gogh was suffering from was syphilis. And syphilis starts off as a physical illness, but the symptoms are relatively mild. And as they get worse, it manifests as neurosyphilis, which does start to affect how one is able to think and function. But what I'm trying to say is, because the medical establishment was fairly unsophisticated then, you couldn't necessarily tell the difference between physical illness and mental illness. And that is the legacy of the Vincent van Gogh story, which I think is quite interesting. Recently I saw an article in the New Yorker, and what caught my attention was this image of this flower, this yellow flower, maybe even a weed, cracking its way through the macadam, the tar surface of a thoroughfare, a deserted thoroughfare, probably in New York or something like that. And just how you kind of have this inversion where suddenly the focus is on this little flower, and all these accoutrements of human industry, the skyscrapers, the traffic lights, the traffic, the commerce sort of fades into the background, almost like clouds. And I just found that visual quite striking. And in a way, it reminds me of Van Gogh. It reminds that vitality of the flower, the energy of the flower, where the whole rest of the world fades into kind of a hazy blue. Just reminds me a bit of Van Gogh, right? So to update ourselves with kind of where we are in the story, Vincent van Gogh is in the asylum of Saint-Remy, which is around about an hour or half an hour from Arles in the south of France. And he's been kind of hanging out there as a sort of an outpatient. They're not quite sure what is wrong with him, but he's kind of been in kind of a hospital situation for around about a year, right? So just compare the whole scenario of being under lockdown, being kind of involuntary, not where you want to be, where you can't do what you want to do, you can't go where you want to go, but instead of it being for 3 weeks or 3 months, Van Gogh's been going through it for a year. And he's got a lot of the same concerns people have now. He doesn't have any money, he doesn't have any money. It's not a case that he doesn't have any, but he doesn't have a lot of money. He's worried about work. He's worried about how he's going to come out and function again in the real world. He's not sure how to get going. All he is feeling lonely. He's feeling like, how am I going to restart my life? And these are legitimate concerns. There aren't clear answers. And as a result, and what is very interesting is this particular month, April 1890, 130 years ago, was one of the most silent months from Vincent van Gogh in years of correspondence. So when you go through the record of the letters, and he wrote hundreds of letters, this month is one of the most silent. And you kind of get the idea that he was just struggling. He was struggling with the daunting situation he was in, the kind of hopeless situation he was in. And it was on this day that he receives a letter from his brother Theo from Paris. And that's exactly what his brother remarks on in the opening line of his letter, where he says, we're worried about you. We're worried about the fact that you're so quiet. We're concerned. Your silence has concerned us, right? It's been over a month. It's been about a month and a week since they last heard from Vincent, and it was quite a short letter. It was not one of his long letters, and that was written on the 15th of March. It's now the 23rd of April, and they're writing not to reply to a letter, but to reply kind of to the silence. And so even though he's been in this asylum for almost a year, around about a year, he's not getting better. Whatever treatment he's getting isn't really working. And some of the treatment is really crude. It is taking hot and cold baths. It is digitalis, which is foxglove, which is actually a poisonous plant. They were treating sick people with something that they thought was a herb, a helpful herb, a healing herb, and actually it was actually poisonous. So, getting out of hospital was actually a good thing because the treatment wasn't really ultimately working. You were being poisoned. Now, think about the analogy with the pandemic. You're somewhat sick. Maybe you've got of the flu or whatever symptoms, and now you go to hospital where there are people suffering with coronavirus, and you can actually get infected with it or reinfected with it or something like that, potentially. In other words, you're going into a potentially toxic environment where you can be worse off than you were, is all I'm saying. I'm just saying hypothetically. So now we're going to read the letter. We're 20 minutes in, and this letter was dated 23rd April 1890, which was a Wednesday. I know today is the 22nd of April, but it's a Wednesday. So it was around about this time, this kind of time of the week, of the year, 130 years ago. And this is, we've also got the actual letter. It's 4 pages, written by Theo to the younger brother, Theo to Vincent. And this is the letter. My dear Vincent, your silence proves to us that you're still suffering. And I need to tell you, my dear brother, that Joe and I are also suffering, knowing that you're still ill. Okay, so Joe is Theo's wife, and Joe has recently given birth to little boy with the name Vincent, and who has been a little bit ill himself. So within the circumstances of the newborn child kind of taking up their time and energy and focus, they're kind of remembering, what about Vincent, who's been in hospital all year, and so they are sort of wondering, Jeepers, how is my brother doing? How's my brother-in-law doing? He goes on to write, "Oh, we'd be so happy if we could do something for you that might give you relief. Dr. Perron writes to us that we mustn't worry, and that this crisis, although longer than the others, will also pass." And isn't that also a kind of analogy to what we are going through with this pandemic? It's a crisis, it's not good news, it's not good, but it'll pass. It's not going to be with us forever. He goes on to write, "If the distance weren't so great, I would certainly have come to see you already, and I'm counting on you the day you need me or feel that it could do you some good to talk with me, to let me know, and I'll come running immediately." So what Theo is saying here is, I haven't abandoned you. If you need me, I will come and see you. Don't lose heart, don't be depressed, don't be sad, don't feel alone. You're not alone. If you need me, just tell me and I'll come running immediately. I will come and see you. And then he goes on and he says, "Last week I'd been married for a year already. How swiftly time passes. We have every reason to be satisfied with that year. I haven't forgotten that you insisted a great deal on my getting married, and you so rightly, for I feel much, much happier. It's true that my wife isn't just anyone, and that I was enormously lucky to find her. We get along very well, and our domestic life is very agreeable. The little one gives Joe, especially, a great deal of work, but he's growing amazingly. He's nervous by nature, but very sweet. He can stay awake for hours without crying, and is beginning to laugh and to make sounds that must be the beginnings of speech. It would do you good if you could see him and play with him." So what his brother is kind of saying is, I'm very happy. Thank you for your advice. Thanks for suggesting that I get married. You were right. I am very happy. And then he talks about this new personality in their lives, this newborn child, who's the source of mostly a lot of joy, and saying, you should play with our child, and you'll be, maybe that'll sort of lift you up, maybe that'll perk you up a little bit. So they're kind of reaching out to him. They're kind of saying, "Hey, are you okay?" And engaging with him and trying to sort of perk him up. Then, and this is something that happens in a lot of letters, Theo talks about art. He says, "At Whitsun, we intend to go and spend the 2 feast days at Pissarro's, who has invited us." So Pissarro is quite an important artist in the story. In a previous letter, Pissarro was the artist who, and this is an artist based at Auvers-sur-Oise, which is the town where Van Gogh ultimately died. So he would ultimately end up in Auvers, kind of because of Pissarro's recommendation to Theo. It's because of Pissarro that Vincent went where he went, right? Not just that, it's not just the where. Pissarro also knew a doctor in Auvers called Dr. Gogh. So it's also because of that little network that Vincent van Gogh went to Auvers. Now, Dr. Gogh was also interested in art, and they struck up a friendship quite early on, Van Gogh and Dr. Gogh. And again, that was set up because of Pissarro. Okay, so let's just put that into perspective. And then Theo goes on and he says, this summer he's going to London, meaning Pissarro, to work. He says, your paintings at the exhibition are very successful. And what he means by that is people are noticing them, people are recommending them, people are liking them, people are positive about them, pretty much everything except that they're not selling, okay? So at this point, in fact, a little bit early in January, Van Gogh did actually manage to sell a painting. So the first painting he ever sold, as far as we know, and it sold for, I think, 400 francs. And I did a calculation. I think you can buy something like 10 suits. You could have bought 10 suits with that kind of money in that time. So that kind of gives you an idea. I could be a little bit off, but it was somewhere around there. So it was a fair sum. If my maths is wrong, or my memory is wrong, I know I did the calculation previously. Let me know in the comments, because it would be good to be accurate on that. Anyway, he goes on to say, the other day Duez stopped me in the street and said, give my compliments to your brother and tell him that his paintings are quite remarkable. Monet said that your paintings were the best in the exhibition. Pretty steep praise. I mean, for a guy like Monet, it's an artist I think is fantastic. Saying things like that, I mean, you wonder whether the brother is buttering up the other brother, but they seem pretty honest, sincere people, the Van Goghs. Anyway, he goes on to say, many other artists have spoken to me about them. Serre came to my house to see the other canvases and was delighted. He says that if he didn't have a genre in which he still had things to say, he would change and search along the path where you're searching. And what he's talking about here is, at this time, it was kind of coming to the end of the Impressionism phase of art in France, and that was what made Van Gogh quite a visionary. Is the sort of Impressionism phase hadn't finished, and he started on something that was new and that the people initially didn't understand or even like, which was Expressionism, which is, instead of sort of softening the world around you and kind of giving, almost like putting opaque glass in front of a scene and sort of softening it, Expressionism was about not necessarily sharpening it, but making it more effusive, giving it more emphasis. So it's probably a good time now to just be explicit about the difference between Impressionism and Expressionism. Impressionists paint scenes almost as if they glanced at it for a very short time, like as if they quickly saw something and they're giving you a general idea. It's almost like seeing something through a fog or a cloud. You're getting a vague, softened idea of something, right? Expressionism is very focused on what you're seeing, but it's especially giving an emotional sense of something. So the emotional side is emphasized with strong colors, strong contrasts, thick paint often, emphasizing size. It's often a caricature or almost a cartoon or something, where the angles are odd and the proportions are changed and interpreted in a way to say, look how vivid this is, look how intense it is, look at the vitality in something that we would ordinarily think of as ordinary, right? It's quite a recent thing in art, Expressionism. It sort of came out in the beginning of the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. It's very subjective and it distorts reality for emotional effect. You can kind of think of Expressionism as the precursor to the current social media. Social media is very expressionistic, it's very subjective, it's very emotional, it's very much about popular moods and ideas, and also often distorting things, isn't it? And probably the best way to understand this is look at the self-portraits Van Gogh did of himself. Sort of just this flat, I mean, you could say, why not just take a photo, because photography had come along. Why not just take a photo of yourself? Why go to all the effort? What is a painting going to give you that a photo isn't? And that's a legitimate question, and these painters try to find legitimate answers. And they said, well, what if we could put more life into the picture than a photo would? And bear in mind, a lot of the photos then were black and white. What if we can put more color into the picture? What if I paint a picture of myself and it's sort of alive with energy? And can you see what I'm getting at? That's what Expressionism was all about. And so we get to the final paragraph of Theo's letter. He says, Lose is back. He wasn't able to stop by and see you because his mother and sister who lived in Marseille have come to stay with him here, and he had to help them move house and didn't have the money to go out of his way. My dear brother, you should know that nothing in the world would give me greater pleasure than knowing you were happy and well, and that every day I make wishes for your speedy recovery. Be of good heart, and good handshake from Joe, and from your brother who loves you, Theo. We aren't going to hear a response from Van Gogh for about a week. So 7 days are going to go by before he responds. Normally he would respond almost immediately. He would eventually respond to his brother, and I think he also wrote to his mother on the 30th of April. And then, quite interestingly, in May, there's kind of an uptick in letters. So March and April, very few letters. In fact, in the entire chronology, in the entire correspondence, there are few months where there were so few letters like this. Like, you can kind of count them on your hands. So this is a very rare time. You almost get the sense that Van Gogh was sort of, I won't say at death's door, but he was sort of, things had deteriorated a lot, and he was struggling, and it is quite ironic that at the end of his treatment in hospital, you would think that he would be feeling better, but he kind of wasn't. And I think he was also feeling like, who is going to save me? Or I need someone's help to get out of here. Who is going to help me? And he wanted his brother's help, but his brother's preoccupied with his own family and his wife. And this letter was to say, dude, I haven't forgotten about you. If you need my help, I'll help you. If you're lonely, if you need me, I will come to you immediately. Just tell me, and I will. And that is an invitation Van Gogh was going to kind of take him up upon, right? And we're going to see how he does that in the next letter from April 30th. And that'll be the subject of the next episode. Between then and now, I'm going to do a couple of episodes. It's a little bit miserable for me putting videos up on YouTube just because so few of you are interested in them. So what I might do, if there just isn't any interest, I'll just put them on Patreon, where a lot of my patrons are interested and engaged and want to talk about it. But I'll just see how it goes. Between now and the next letter, I'll put up some coverage on my trip to All. So if you're stuck at home and you're feeling isolated and you're not going out and you're feeling stuck, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey with pictures and experiences to when I went to All around about this time last year. It was more kind of the mid-May, but I'll talk to you about how I got there, what I did there, what I saw, and I'll share some of the photos. And I'll do the exact same thing with Orvais, but I want to do that closer to this time next month and throughout June and July, because that is the time that he was there. So I want to show you Orvais in the sort of in real time, put it that way. Okay, so I'm not going to take it further than that. Thanks very much for listening. Again, if you're interested in this particular subject, you can buy the book, The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. I recommend it over and above the paperback. The script on the paperback's a bit small, and the advantage of the Kindle book is it's got a lot of links. And this is going to provide you a good backstory to appreciate where we're going with this ongoing narrative. Again, if you need to catch up, go on to the playlist section of this channel, and you can catch up on the coverage of Vincent van Gogh, but also of other cases as well, if you're interested. Thank you for listening. Take care, stay safe, eat well, sleep well, and I'll see you guys next time.